Hello everyone. We are Group 12 and today we will be presenting the paper, The History of Internet and the Missing Narrative. This paper is actually about some misconceptions people have about the Internet. We think ARPANET was the first a network Internet that came into. As you can see in this chart, the year and the developments, World Brain was the first one in 1938. It was to put information at central location, let's say reading material, for example, and people can access from different places. Same thing, 1945, there was an article published as we may think, and that had the same concept and it got traction among a lot of people. 1958, ARPA was established, and then later the time-sharing services by MIT, Sage, IRMA, Sabri, Mac, which we will talk about this presentation. The metaphor of internet, a tiny acorn, like ARPANET growing to a giant tree, is flawed. ARPANET was one among many, but not the large one. Several commercial and non-commercial networks, the time that ARPANET was introduced, already existed in the globe. As we know, commercial networks mainly came into like the 70s, ATM's arrival in the 80s, till 90s, internet, before the arrival of World Wide Web, internet was like a TV station without programs, not general use, specific uses. World Wide Web and TCP/IP led to universal acceptance. So by 1945, the US Sage air defense system was established to do real-time integration of data sources. By 1960s, Sage was connecting 25 military systems. Late 50s, time-sharing networks by MIT and some other providers, which was a large mainframe computer shared among many users, and they had typewriter-like terminals to provide input. IRMA by Bank of America, 1962, connecting 32 computers. Sabri, the online reservation system for American Airlines, was introduced 1965. As you can imagine, IBM CIC had over 16,000 licensed users by 1981 versus ARPANET 764 at the same year. Surprisingly, IBM has been written out of popular internet history. Uh, Private and public networks by 70s, hundreds of large networks existed. Some companies established private permanent owned networks. Public networks mainly rely on telco monopolies. General Electric time sharing network started in 65. By 69, they had a powerful computer, centralized computer, providing local access, major use cities in satellite link to Europe. By 70s, General Electrical had access to over 100 locations from Puerto Rico to Helsinki. EDP, CSS, EDS, the providing remote services like payroll and other routine processing, as we can see, EDP still exists. Online information services like Dialog, providing bibliographic information, 50 data sets, and 12 million records by 70s. The electronic data interchange standard was introduced for different sectors, and the first one was for the railroad in 1970s, which served as a prototype. The big thing that happened was the 74, the packet switching networks like Telnet and Timenet, which increased the cost significantly. The social construction of internet protocols, this liberated the communication of networks. So the networks, different networks can talk to each other. Virtual circuits were introduced, which helped the converting incoming messages to packets and guarantee of service. In 1975, the collision within the CCITP, which consists of the Post Telecom and Telecommunication of Canada, France, Britain, Japan, and US. They defined X.25, which was an end-to-end packet switching protocol they used. By 84, the X.400 email protocol, later replaced by the SMTP, was introduced. IBM and Senna by mid-70s developed proprietary architectures, which was very successful. Now I will hand it over to my group member, uh, for more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmad. Now let's see the impact of PCs in the 80s. So until the arrival of the personal computer, network access was confined to the relatively few users inside organizations who had the use of computer or time-sharing terminal. The diffusion of millions of consumer PCs in the 1980s created a mass market for online services. This market was largely ignored by the computer manufacturers and academic networks, but was fostered by the computer hobbyists, computer online services, and the PTGs. There were two types of online access for the PC. Users who had no institutional network that were small, free, informal, and usually local BBS, or national commercial networks such as CompuServe, and both took off in the early 1980s. BBS were accessible to technically capable and dedicated computer users, mainly hobbyists, and the first system which went online in February 1978 is attributed to two Chicago-based computer hobbyists. And after that, BBS idea spread like wildfire. And the most successful commercially run consumer network of the 1980s was CompuServe. In 1978, CompuServe collaborated with the Midwest Association of Computer Clubs to establish a bulletin board style service called Micronet. And the service was popular and went nationwide in 1980. And by the summer 1984, CompuServe claimed to have 130K subscribers, 600 employees, and 26 mainframe computers in its Columbus headquarters. And by September 1985, the number of subscribers had grown to 225K. And there were competitors of ComServe, though they were few because the entry cost of building a national network were very high, such as the Source, Jenny, Delphi, and Prodigy. As you see in this table, none of these services was as successful as ComServe. And relative latecomer to consumer network America Online, that is AOL, provided much more effective computation for ComServe, but demonstrating that ease of use and accessibility could overcome network effects, AOL grew extremely fast and overtaking ComServe's 2 million plus subscribers in 1995 with 3.5 million users. Now let's see the transformation from ARPANET to the internet. So the diffusion of desktop personal computer in the 80s created a mass market for organizational and domestic online services, which was being supplied by closed corporate networks, consumer networks, email services, bulletin boards, and national videotex services that was outside the United States. There could be only one winner in the four-horse race to define the architecture of the Internet: the CCITT, IBM, OSI, or the ARPA community. In the late 1980s, the OSI 7-layer model was the front runner, and Videotex, which was also a technically viable option, never gained sufficient momentum in the United States to be a realistic challenger. And there are mainly three reasons for the ascendancy of ARPA's TCP/IP protocols. The first one is that the ARPA internet community was politically adroit, and as its networking model pervaded universities and research organizations. And the second, there was a solid political push, especially from the Clinton-Gore administration, that forced the pace of development. And the third reason for the dominance of ARPA was that the decentralized management of the ARPA-based internet that eliminated most of the bureaucratic friction to joining the network community. And in the mid 1980s, the ARPA internet was a substantial network with about 2000 host computers. Although the ARPA internet was the best known example of an academic research network, it was far from unique and not especially large. And during the 1980s, several US university consortia created networks to provide their faculty and students with similar facilities to those enjoyed by ARPA grant holders, and several of them grew to comparable size to the ARPA network. For example, 1986, the UUCP network had more than 7,000 hosts, and the Usenet network more than 2,500. So, and after the 1986, as network traffic increased, the NSF communized IBM and MCI to build new backbone using TCP/IP protocols. Because the original ARPA backbone was nearly 20 years old and it was decommunized, and the original ARPA internet was transmitted into NSFNet. From that point on, it was no longer necessary to prefix internet with ARPA, and NFSNet effectively became the internet, and government-owned network from the US academic and research community. And after that, network effects begin to work their magic, and the number of hosts on the internet increased exponentially as academic research networks attach themselves. Now comes the World Wide Web. By 1990s, the internet contained millions of potentially valuable files and documents, but the network was unfathomable. Without directories and means of navigation, internet content was inaccessible to anyone other than experts. So in 1993, the most popular navigation aid was a system called Gopher, whose history is instructive because it shows that World Wide Web was not the only potential means of organizing the internet. Gopher was designed at the University of Minnesota to find documents on the internet, and it was very much university activity. And after the system went live in April 91, other universities took up the software from their campus information systems, and after that, number of Gopher servers grew exponentially, not just in universities but also in organizations of every kind. The experience of using Gopher was like browsing a menu-based library catalog. It had peaks in 95, more than 9,000 Gopher servers were on the internet. And the turning point for the web came with the development of Mosaic web browser. Mosaic was developed at the University of Illinois by the team of programmers led by Mark Anderson, and the browser was a textbook example of user-friendly point-and-click software. And there were several reasons for the decline of Gopher and the rise of web. And one reason that stalled Gopher momentum was that the browsing experience was much more user-friendly and accessible than Gopher session. And in June 1995, there were more than 23,000 web servers installed, and it became the most popular internet format. And from this paper, we can conclude that internet is much richer story than portrayed in the standard history. And internet did not come out of vacuum. And author illustrated the push-pull relationship between infrastructure and applications, and also the research about history of ARPANET and the Gopher and the rise of World Web. And the study's main point is not that the fictional internet based on IBM's SNA and Gopher, it would have been better than the internet as we know it, but that the characteristics of today's internet are far from inevitable. Thank you everyone for listening to us. We are open to any questions and feedback.